like her.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome, welcome. We've just opened the gates, and so we're going to wait a minute or so before we begin our presentation. And in that time, I will speak and do a little bit of housekeeping. My name is Lisa Hill. I work here at Infobase on the marketing team. And I'm thrilled that you're all joining us today for a presentation and a discussion called Going Beyond DEI to Justice and Healing, which is the second in a year-long conversation that Heather Liu and Adam Smith are hosting for us and running for us. So we're very excited to welcome a panel today. Before we get into the meat of the presentation, we have to talk about GoToWebinar. The chat function, which you see on your GoToWebinar panel, is one way. So we can send things to you, but you cannot send things to us. However, we do want this to be a conversation and an interactive experience. So please look at your GoToWebinar control panel and look for the word questions. When you click on that questions box, that is where you can ask your questions, make your comments, and we'll see those questions and we will respond to what we can. There's a lot of folks here today, so we're going to do our very best to include as much of it in our conversation as we can. So to make sure that this is working, to make sure that you understand how to communicate with us, I'm just going to ask you to type in where you're calling from today. What state are you from? What town are you from? What building are you in? It doesn't matter. Just type away right in that box. I'm calling from Boston myself, where it's finally over freezing for the first time in a very long time. And once we do that, once we can confirm that you all know how to ask questions, we'll get started. And Heather and Adam, you should probably see those questions coming in now. So just make sure you got them. Perfect. We can see that we got Tennessee, Ontario, welcome Canada, Missouri, Indiana, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, Florida, Pennsylvania again, more Indiana, Montana, Oregon, just about every state represented here. Yeah, just that is where you will ask questions. That's where you're going to make comments. That's where you're going to say what you're going to say. And at the end of this presentation next week on Tuesday, I'm going to send you all a follow-up email that will include a link to the presentation, a recording, including some material that Heather will speak about as well, a blog that she's prepared that we'll send out on Tuesday. So without further ado, I will say to Heather and Adam, I did not enter the poll question. I sent you the list instead, Adam, so you got it. All right, guys, I'm going to disappear from view. Heather, Adam, thank you so much, and please take it away.
All right, welcome, welcome, welcome. Adam, do you just want to briefly introduce what we're doing today?
It's great to see y'all, everyone from around the country. Our conversation, Heather, Lisa forgot the beginning part, don't believe the hype. So for all of us 80s, 90s, don't believe the hype, go beyond DEI through justice and to healing. Thanks to Infobase for having us. This year-long, what we like to call a collab with Infobase, is a great opportunity to lean into critical conversations with folks around the issues of healing and justice, last month trauma, but some really imperative things for educators of all types, parents, community activists, caring adults, young people, all the things to try to create community of care and support for each other. It's great to share this space with our team today. We have some fantastic panelists. We're going to have some real conversations today, and it's always wonderful to partner with my friend, my colleague, my sister, Heather Liu. Heather, you want to get us started?
Yeah, and those of us who weren't 80s and 90s folks, we still know don't believe the hype. Just saying. All right, so just to orient us to where we're at currently, I think it's important to just acknowledge our time, space, and place. So I'm going to invite everybody just to take a moment and ground themselves with where they're at. Take some deep breaths. I know for some of us, we're in a journey. We have taken many, many different paths to get to this like actual moment, whether, you know, it's our lifetime, whether it's just getting through some meetings, whether it was just like lasting through this past hour. And so I just want to acknowledge that that's part of our justice and healing journey. Excuse me. So many of us currently reside on the stolen lands of Indigenous peoples. Heather, that's me, is located on Dakota and Ojibwe land, and Adam is currently on the land of Shawnee and Osage peoples. Since we are remote, I invite you to type the land and space you occupy in the questions box. We honor the physical, psychological, emotional, and spiritual spaces that we occupy. These lands, often unceded, have been taken by force and colonized, and have legacies of violence, murder, and pain. This land and its eco-memory long precede us and will long outlive us in wisdom and energy. I want to invite us to recognize how this space, time, and place hold many truths and power, and deserves to be reunited and restored with the Indigenous peoples of the lands we occupy. And land back is a much needed and necessary action in our practice as healers in community. Land back is not just a phrase, but we must act upon this through legislation, solidarity, and practice by redistributing power, wealth, and in action through meaningful coalition. We also honor the ancestors and the narratives of the peoples and their knowledge who have empowered us to be here in community today. We're in the midst of a global pandemic and continued racialized violence, legacies of colonialism, genocide, boarding schools, COVID-19, murders of Black folks at the white supremacist hands of policing, violence and assaults on trans women of color, Stop Line 3 and ecological violence, and hate against Asian women, femmes, elders, and youth, and continued xenophobia against communities of color. Our histories are complicated, tangled, and filled with resilience of our ancestors from before and yet to come. Who are the ancestors that you call upon to guide you in this moment? I'm going to invite you once again to write their names and bring their presence into the questions section of this webinar. I'm going to be calling my Amma, my grandmother from Tushan, China, into this space. We want to imagine spaces and places where we are liberated, transformed, and in solidarity, together in struggle, magic, hope, love, imagination, and in futures. I recognize the immense power and privilege we all hold in sharing our time together today. And we, Adam and myself, and our presenters, our guests, wish you and our community health, safety, slivers of joy, and care in the midst of a time of grief, death, pain, and trauma.
Heather, thank you so much. Great to have you all here. Again, Adam Smith, he, him pronouns. Great to see y'all. A little bit, Heather, you want to go back to the slide with, look at me as a young lion. You see that, Dr. Barry? Viking fan, born and raised. Define myself first and foremost as a husband, father, a papa, 3 beautiful grandbabies. Proud Black man with multiracial roots, product of the Twin Cities, Minneapolis, St. Paul. That is not only the roots of where I'm from and the epicenter of change, but also the epicenter of so much violence on people's lives. So it's an honor to be here with y'all today. A little bit about me and the work that I do. It's really interesting to have your work and then to have your occupation, and sometimes those things intersect. But in my daytime life, I do campus-wide transformational work through an academic advising and student success lens. I've been doing that about 25 or 30 years at a couple institutions around the country, most recently here in Lexington, Kentucky. Good to see y'all. Heather, do you want to introduce yourself?
For sure. All right, so what's up? My name is Heather. I also go by HC and H. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I am a small, round, racially ambiguous, golden brown human with hexagonal glasses in front of you. People in my life would say I have eyes that look like coffee grounds, and they have like kind of an amber ring around the edges. I have a septum piercing and some other piercings on my face. I have teal colored hair and I'm wearing a beanie, a gray beanie today, and a jean jacket. So I look like I'm probably straight out of the 80s or 90s. So just as we're talking about, don't believe the hype. I identify as an angry Gemini Earth Dragon. I'm multiracial and Asian, queer and cisgender, gender expansive and disabled. And I identify as someone who's a survivor and surviving. As we talk about going beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion, like as someone who's really a chameleon and has like learned how to navigate and been within throughout institutions my entire life. And so I'm very much a survivor. I'm depressed and anxious, and I'm an artist as well as an educator that's currently in Minnesota, but I grew up in California, I grew up in LA. I am a grandchild of immigrants. I was raised by my grandparents from Tucson, and I have lineage across the Pacific. And Adam and I have worked together in education, and I very much identify as someone who's a holder of power and empowerment and questions, and very much as someone who's an alchemist. So taking things that feel ordinary and making them feel magical and extraordinary. A lot of the work that I do in terms of being an educator, as well as someone who is supposed to do training around racial justice in my everyday, I think a lot about relational leadership and community coalition, and also cultural healing, especially through like somatics and through art, as well as the different ways that we can come together and really think beyond diversity, equity, and inclusion, and actually practice destabilizing, disrupting, as well as dismantling white supremacy, colonialism, and capitalism in everything that we do. There's a picture on the slide that has a golden dragon on a gradiated background. And on top of that, there's a piece of prose that says, "An immigrant is not a forever foreigner if they are home within themselves." So, and then a picture of myself. And we're gonna have our panelists also introduce themselves, and so you can get to know them. So I'll invite Dr. Timothy Berry, to introduce himself.
So, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy and pleased to be here. And my good brother, Adam, and sister, Heather Lou, just thank you so much for the invitation to join today's panel. I'll just go really quickly, actually. Rather than talk about all the stuff I do, I talk about why I do what I do. For me, it's first and foremost is love. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. And it starts with me having to love myself when this world doesn't love me back. And so my own healing, it begins and ends with myself love, and then having the ability and the capacity to love other people because I love myself. And it's finding the connective tissue to our common humanity. So, you know, I always often talk about genealogy because I think that is important. And so I'm the sixth son of Esther and Edward, one of 11 children in my family, and offspring of some of the greatest survivors of any kind of racist and oppressive system everyone can possibly imagine. And so that's my ancestry. And you know, I'm a citizen of the world. I see a lot of discussion that we have around justice, and I think of it in a global context. I'm a husband and father, and you know, I talk about being Black and being male, and then thinking about how that's orientation towards wounds and heals at the same time is a large part of my work, and it tends to be multidisciplinary. So, you know, I have some things that I can be attributed to doing that you know, I'm a composer, writer, musician, creator. I'm a fierce advocate for racial justice. I'm trained in educational leadership, although my emphasis is really about being with the people in the struggle and through that particular lens. And finally, you know, I'm curious. I want to know what I don't know. And I'll just end there and say I'm just happy to be here today. Thank you so much.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ursuline Hope, and similar to my last name, I pride myself in being hope for a lot of systems that we frequent and interact with, and really creating an opportunity to bring about justice in those systems because they impact the quality of our lives. There's a lot on this slide. There's a lot going on, and I really don't want to break it down too much. And at the same time, I think my whole purpose and being on this earth is to really be able to affect transformational changes within the systems, again, that we all frequent. So I'm a lot of different things to a lot of different people, but most of all, I definitely am a woman of faith, and I believe that's the reason that I am here with you all today. And so the work that I do is actually in the public sector, which is my way and opportunity to give back, to really be able to dismantle those systems of oppression and build things up in a way that never started with equity. And so that's my passion, that's my drive, that's what I do. I'm a community activist on the weekends. I rarely sleep because of all of the stuff that I do. And I think we all wake up every day to be the best versions of ourselves and to give back and pour into the folks we interact with. So, you know, just to, again, wrap that all together and not kind of go bullet by bullet as you see on the slides. I feel like I'm hope. And so that's who I am.
Ursuline, can you tell everybody, because everyone shared where they are in the chat, where are you coming from?
Yeah, so I'm calling in from Colorado Springs. Originally, I was born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Oh, that's kind of sketchy, that Milwaukee life. Timothy, can you tell everybody where you are too?
Yeah, right now I'm coming from Mankato, Minnesota, the land of the Dakota. Yeah, so that's where I'm coming from today.
Thank you. Ah, Miss Taryn.
Hi friends, my name is Taryn Henning, she, her. I am tuning in from Central Kentucky today. But I am from Peoria, Illinois, born and raised, spent a little bit of time in Los Angeles, spent a very random short amount of time in Switzerland, but Kentucky is where you will find me right now. I'll try to keep this short. I didn't add a whole lot to the slide. I'm an Aries. That shows growing up, I used to read the horoscopes and be like, no, that's not me. And then I got more honest with myself and I thought, ooh, that's big, your energy. I am the youngest child in my family. I think that shows too, being raised as the baby. I am a connoisseur of ways to protect my peace. One of my favorite words is no. So if I don't want to do something, 9 times out of 10, you will not find me doing it. Some of the relationships in my life that mean the most to me, I am a sister. My sister is one of my best friends. She's supposed to be tuning in. I can't see the attendees list. So if she is, shout out to the Dr. Henning. But she's a big support of mine. I am an aunt to her children. I am Groot's mom, who you will see very unhappily dressed in a lobster costume on the slide. I'm a lifelong student. I love learning. I think that there are always ways that I can grow and evolve and better come into myself for every new season of my life. I identify as a Black, multiracial, cis het woman of color. And for my why am I here? My freshman year of college, I was introduced to a quote by Aboriginal activist Lilla Watson that said, if you are here to help me, then go beyond your way. But if you are here because your liberation is bound with mine, then come and let us work together. And that has stuck with me ever since then. And that is a big chunk of my why, because I do this work for myself, for my nieces and my nephews, for those who come after me. And I do it for all of us, because none of us are free until all of us are free.
Love it. Love it. Ah, Dr. Zach.
That's my new album cover. No, I am Zach Ritter. I am Interim Associate Dean of Students at Cal State Dominguez Hills, which is located in Compton, Carson, California, Tongva land. But who am I? I'm a son of a refugee. I'm a grandson of Holocaust Auschwitz survivors. And so I think that I become by de facto a student of history, because trying to understand the trauma and why I have such a small family, because they were murdered in Europe, and getting interested then in learning about Black histories and Latinx histories and Native histories, and making connections between different community groups to try to build bridges, right? I got that on there. I'm hopefully a bridge builder, but bridges get walked on sometimes. I'm sure we could all relate with that. And so what I do is I try to help my students dream up a different world, and then try to organize and activate folks to then create that world of what could be. And my favorite class that I teach is The Revolution Might Be Televised: Social Justice History Through Music and Movies. And so, yeah, shout out to Gil Scott-Heron. And I think a quote that inspires me, I'm a kid of the 90s, is Tupac, who said, "I may not be the person that changes the world, but I will spark the brain that will change the world." And hopefully, hopefully I'll be able to do that one day.
Thank you, Zach. We got some strong folks, y'all. So Heather, if you can stop share. Yeah, thank you so much. We want to really have this be about y'all, right? And conversations. I've got some questions, and of course we'll talk about those things, and that'll kind of be the beginning, but it's really important that you all get a chance. So if you have questions, we're supposed to go to the top of the hour, but if y'all have participated in some of our things in the past, we will go until people are done, right? I mean, we're that kind of village, so we want to make sure from that worldview. So the first question I wanted to just pose to our panel, and maybe start with Taryn, because we were talking about this today, right? Taryn, can you talk about the difference to you? Because there's all this talk about DE&I, right? DEI, DEI, DEI. So you could talk about the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion, but then what does justice look like to you? Right? Because that's really the important part that we're talking about. So can you talk about those things for us?
Yeah, so I think in trying to think through some examples of each, a lot of folks are familiar, at least as buzzwords, if nothing else, with hearing diversity, equity, and inclusion. And diversity, I think that might be the one that most people are familiar with. So that might be if you look around in your workplace and you think, okay, well, we're good to go on white, cisgender, heterosexual, able-bodied, middle-class men, but like, how do we get some different identities in here? And so maybe you hire different people, and now your workplace is diverse. Inclusion, I feel, then is going with that same example, is you've got these diverse people, so how do you include them? How do you incorporate them? Maybe you invite them to the meetings. Maybe you even let them speak or ask for their opinion. But then equity really looks at how do we level that playing field, because we recognize that just because someone is at the table doesn't mean that they have all the same tools. And I'll actually share an example that I really liked, that I heard earlier today, an analogy for equity and the difference between that and equality is if you went into a neighborhood or a village and donating new shoes, and say everyone gets a brand new pair of shoes, then that's kind of equality. You're handing out the same exact size of shoes. Everyone gets a size 9. Well, that's not really equitable because not everyone fits into that. So thinking about that, I think as we get into these spaces, people are more familiar with that. But then a term that I've seen much more throughout the past year or so is this term JEDI, where you incorporate the idea of justice with equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I that's honestly not my favorite term when we're talking about this work, only because I feel like, who am I to define justice for someone? And I feel like when we're in at least most of the spaces where I've seen the term Jedi being used, the people who are the ones who are defining justice are also the people who benefit the most from upholding systems of oppression. So you asked me, Adam, how do I define justice? I honestly, I don't have a clear definition, but I'm not going to shut down someone who holds a marginalized identity. I'm not going to be the one to tell them, we're not going to do that, or I'm not okay with that. You know, I mean, some people's idea of justice is an eye for an eye, and some people aren't going to like that. I don't necessarily have to personally agree with that, or think that that's the right way, but I'm not going to tell someone their feelings are invalid or that that's not the right way for them to experience their oppression.
So good. Yeah, I part of the conversations being a young person, Dr. Berry, right, that went to college in the 90s when people saw the thing we knew, right? When people finally could turn their TV and watch Rodney King being beaten. Now, we knew brothers getting beat, right? We know what that looked like, but people got a chance to see it. And there was a point that we maybe had a little bit of hope and thought, now they see what we're talking about. It's right on TV, right? And then nothing happened, right? And the reaction then when the LA uprisings happened, we don't use term riot, right? When the LA uprising happened, because we got a country founded in riotism, that's what sounds like a Boston Tea Party to me, right? I mean, we are a country founded in revolution and fighting the power, and we celebrate it on July 4th. But when certain people rise up, it becomes a riot, and why are they destroying their own neighborhood, right? And can you imagine how powerless one must feel to rage like that? I mean, I saw my hometown burning. And I wasn't crying for Target because Target got more stuff. And yes, the people of Lake Street helped build up the home stores, and people invested and brought those pieces back in many ways. But I was crying because of the pain. You know, when I was a kid, I'd feel powerless as an abused kid. And there were times I just break shit. And it was always the shit I loved the most because it was the closest to me. And then you're like, dang, I just broke, my Nintendo or my this or my that. And so when Taryn talks about justice looking different for everyone and making space for everyone's justice and saying, well, your definition of justice, no, how justice looks to you is how justice looks to you. Timothy, talk a little bit about, because I know you do a lot of work around justice and healing and wounded healer work. Talk a little bit about justice and recognizing, and you did in your introduction so well, talked about, I give a lot of talks about white supremacy, right? Campuses bring me, come talk about white supremacy in the classroom. And they don't want to hear me talk about each one of us, right? It has to start with healing you. It has to start with doing your own work. It has to start there. Talk a little bit about justice and healing and how those things coalesce, kind of pivoting on what Taryn was talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I offer this as a way to think of it. I'm reminded of the scholar Cornel West. He said, "Justice is what love looks like in public." And the thing about that is, love might be different for everybody too, right? And in fact, I might love enough where I got to go get the strap. I'm just going to be real with y'all. And it's not a new formation. We read even our most revered historical figures, Ida B. Wells. Read some of her work when she said, "Why do I have this rifle in my house on the wall?" She said, "Well, sometimes Negroes might have to get our rifles," right? And you talk about like rebellions. you know, the country was founded on riot from white people, but it also was at the same time fending off many rebellions from Negroes, right? And these are erasures because they don't want us to know about the fact that, you know, there's a whole movement in abolitionist circles that, you know, Kelly Carter Jackson's new book, you know, Force of Freedom, the abolition work and the politics of violence. Now, I'm saying all that, and here I'm going to talk about love, but I'm just saying, I want to give you a context of the history of this country when it comes to justice. It's not as easy as loving somebody in a non-violent way is what I'm trying to say. I'm not a purveyor of violence myself because I think I'm not. See, you're playing talk about 90s. I may go back a little bit further than most of y'all. I'm going to assume, you know, but I go back to the caravan of love. I even go back to in my young childhood days of listening to one Marvin Gaye who said, "Love is the only power that can conquer hate. War is not the answer." Right? But that's an African way of knowing. So I think about it that way. But when it comes to justice, more fundamentally for me, and this concept of loving enough to about healing. I think the transformative work is that, and this is one thing I think the discipline of people from African descent particularly have had about, you know, only resorting and only looking at how the rebellions are positioned against something else that's more fundamental to African ways of knowing, and that is love. That is saying, you know, we could be doing this a lot worse. This could go a lot worse, but we're trying to give y'all understanding, if white supremacy, right, white folk, that we actually have a different way of orienting ourselves towards justice through this prism of love and of hope and through looking at each other and finding common humanity and giving us a chance over and over again. That's why folks will do protests, and even the ones who continue to even consider violently reacting also have this tension around. But yeah, but in our ancestral DNA, it's about now how do we do this in a more humane way, right? And so. For me, the healing part comes into it this way. It's somatic. And it is really thinking about how much bandwidth I have in my nervous system in order to absorb the kind of trauma that's induced by racism and the toxicity that's induced by injustice enough for me to have my own pathway, because if I don't do it myself, society's not going to do that for me. So that's why the concept of wounded healing for me is actually a personal endeavor initially. Because I can't depend on somebody else. If I do, I'll die. I die early. You look at the statistics, and in fact, in the pandemic, and I'm gonna say this: Black men, the number one with a bullet, the lowest life expectancy, and it lost another 3 years off of Black men's lives, and during the pandemic. And you know who was really the close second? Black women, by far. So what I'm saying is, like, we have to understand that justice also has to be thought of in this way. I always appreciate, you know, anyone's suffering in terms of oppressive characteristics that this country has enacted upon people for any reason whatsoever. But I think we don't talk enough about the idea that settler colonial anti-Black capitalism is the foundation. And so if we're going to do this in any kind of a way, we've got to put that on the table. And so justice looks like, I need to love Black people. And then I need to start thinking about how loving Black people is going to continue on the whole color line spectrum that we talk about and all the other things that intersect. But Blackness is first for me, because that's the foundation of all of this anti-Blackness. So that justice work and healing work for me begins with myself, other Black folk, getting Black folk, and then other brown folk, and then our indigenous brothers and sisters and all of that. And by the way, when I say Black, you know, the constructed nature of how race works, there's Black folks in all those other categories I just talked about, but I'll leave that alone for now.
When you say Black, it's holistic, right?
That's what I'm saying. Exactly. That's what I'm saying.
That's right. Because people say to me, well, you're by this, or no, I'm a Black man, right? I mean, that's just me, right? So Ursuline, you and I talk a lot about, you know, in your state is EDI, right? And you have a governor's mandate. You have a mandate. We're going EDI. We're going to force people to create equity, justice, inclusive, and the performative nature of that, right? Just it's almost like this performance. You know, we want it on a banner. Everybody want a position now. Everyone an EDI position so that they aren't seen as those folks that are attacking supposed CRT, because I'm not them, right? We all know as people of color, when we coined the term Karen, that Karen is not, you know, Karen is not that person. Karen is a person who is really close, who's liberal, who we invite to the barbecue, who loves the EDI position, who knows how to weaponize, and that's from 1619 that's been happening in our country, knows how to weaponize not only the whiteness, but her womanhood to do harm to Black bodies, right, or brown bodies. So one of the things that you were talking about is the adverse impact of these diversity, equity, inclusion efforts on the small number, because where you work, I know it's almost 95% non-Black folks, non-people of color. And so this focus on and this mandate of, whether it's in your place that you work or on campuses or in K-12, those efforts have had some adverse impact on the very people they're there to create equity, inclusion, and justice supposedly for. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree 100% with what Taryn was saying in regards to justice looks different, you know, for different folks. And for me, I think that when I think of justice in the sense of not creating that adverse impact, it feels institutionalized. So we no longer have to feel like there's a performance or some type of symbolic individual within our organizations that are perpetuating this like diversity digest that's going on right now, right? So when I think of justice, I really think about dismantling systems within organizations that have been segregating people of color from different managerial positions, right? Or industry specifics in regards to segregation. So when I think of justice, I think about it's easy. You don't have to think about it anymore because it just is. We don't have to continue to educate individuals because they feel empowered to educate themselves. There's no more racial battle fatigue, right? Like there's no tokenism. There's no entertainment for individuals. And I also think about white people feeling as if they're not having their privilege disturbed. There's no pet to threat syndrome. So a lot of these things, when I think about the context of justice and the adverse impact, all of the things that I just mentioned are real to the individuals doing the work within these systems. And accountability is necessary in order to really move the needle in the direction where things are institutionalized and there's not that reaction from organizations and ways in which to capitalize. Once again, I think, Dr. Berry, you mentioned it really well, capitalizing on the backs of Black people, just in a different way now. It looks a little bit different. And that's where you get a lot of these positions, as you mentioned, Adam, in the sense of the DEI manager, DEI coordinator. I mean, whatever fancy title you want to put on it, but if you're not doing the internalized work to really create that paradigm shift, then it all is just a performance.
And it's the one thing, thank you for that. The one thing that's really gets me thinking about is, you know, the other day, I don't want to get too political, but since I got the mic, somebody was asking, you know, we had a State of the Union. It's not just good enough not to be that orange dude. What you doing for the people? Like the people, capital T, capital P. Like the people, 5 to 1. And I'm not just talking about Black and brown people. I'm talking about what the people want. Are you just as dangerous? Because the only time you talk about the people is when it's time to get you elected. But then it becomes, I gave everybody something. Well, that's not equity. That's because I guarantee you the other folks only care about their people, right? And that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no matter how hateful, harmful it is. But those are our challenges, right? Is how do we get that level of equity that we're asking for, all of us, right? Not just people of color, but our trans folks, all of the allies and the accomplices in the work. And it's a challenge because it's always juxtaposed against, well, at least we're not. But aren't you really? Zach, talk a little bit about what Ursuline brought up about dismantling, right? This idea of why we're calling it DEI, but we're not focused on really truly dismantling these systems and maybe the withins of each of us. We work in a higher ed world where we have DEI offices all over the place. But the spider webs, Tara knows my job on campus is to remove spider webs, because those are the things that when you're walking through and you're a student and you don't see them and they hit you in the face and all of a sudden it just envelops you. And those spider webs are the things that our systems create and our people create. So talk a little bit about dismantling all of the isms and the white supremacy and the patriarchy and the colonialism and all these pieces.
So I work in higher ed, and I'm thinking about the first college that was built by white colonial settlers was Harvard, right? In 1636. It's also interesting that Harvard was technically the first corporation that was in, quote unquote, what the colonizers called the New World, or Turtle Island is the other name, right? And it was the board of directors, or like the trustees, was a corporation. It was a business. And Ebony and Ivy is a book, right, by Dr. Craig Weiler. And he talks about how these Ivy Leagues almost went out of business. Harvard, Princeton, Brown, you name it, all these, they almost went out of business. And then what did they start doing? They started owning Black folks, right? And he documents how they engaged heavily with the slave trade, and it got them a bunch of money. And now they're the premier institutions of our day. But that date, 1636, sticks with me for Harvard's founding, for Christian white land-owning men, because that 36, that there's 36% legacy admits to Harvard this year. And we know that means white, wealthy affirmative action for white wealthy folks. But we don't, we couch it as legacy, right? We don't couch it as a program to keep the status quo or white supremacy culture going. So you asked me about dismantling. I mean, how do you dismantle something that's been going on, at least documented 1636, but we know this has been going on 1619. We know there's, the ship that crashed into Georgia in the 1500s that was, Spanish owned, and the Black folks escaped from that ship. One thing my student taught me this week comes to mind. Paul Quinn College in the Dallas area, it's HBCU, Paul Quinn, check it out. I didn't know about it before. I was a little bit ignorant about it, but they're breaking the mold, right? They're doing something new, and they're saying, if you got accepted to our school, our college, you can pick 2 family members, and they're going to be accepted as well. And you're going to go on the college journey with these 2 family members that you have chosen, rather than come on into the white institution, be as white as you can, be as capitalistic as you can, and I hope you make it. That's a new paradigm. That's interesting, right? Challenging what we know to be higher education, hopefully with the goal of healing. When I think about what it could look like or what things could be different, I was listening to Dr. Berry And there's been moments, there's been pockets in the history of this place that we find ourselves. The Poor People's Campaign, 1968, all right, where Dr. King's trying to bring together kind of a race-class fusion, as Dr. Ian Haney Lopez would talk about, with basically poor white folks and poor black folks and poor Latinx folks coming together and saying, there's a system operating on us, and now we're about to operate on this system. There's been stuff before, like 1676, right? Before Bacon's Rebellion, 1676, right? Indentured servants of a bunch of different colors, apparently before 1676, when the laws were changed because there was a multiracial army that was going against Christian white landowning men, there was apparently people marrying each other, people making love to each other. There weren't the hard and fast racialized laws that happened after Bacon's Rebellion. So it's not like humans are not capable of, like Dr. Berry says, loving on each other and you know, Spike Lee doing the right thing, but there's systems at play. Now, I want to give the mic back. I don't want to take too much space, you know, but when we dismantle, thinking about what Ursuline said, these institutions are really good at picking up the catchphrases to say, oh, you want that? Okay. Well, we got a whole office for that now, right? And they make it in their own image, and they do it their own way in order usually to get more money and prestige, all right? And so then they'll start a whole rubric with USA, you know, News and World Report, you know, scorecard. We are the most diverse. We got the most everything, and we are great. But then you talk to whatever BIPOC folks, QT POC folks at the institution, and like, it's not the business. This is not where we want to be. This is traumatic to me. And so I think if you really want to challenge status quo supremacy, white supremacy at these institutions, you got to look at the pyramid that they are. And you know, Mario Savio in '64, the free speech movement, right? He was saying, I don't want to be a product of this institution that where the board of trustees is like a board of directors, like a corporation, and we are the students and we are being operated upon. And sometimes you just have to put your body in the gears and the levers, right? He said this at Berkeley. You have to do fundamental change at the board of directors level, at the mid-management level, and at the student level. And it's going to take a long time and a lot of changes. And some folks that say, we'll just throw out the whole mess and start our own colleges. Some days I'm like, yeah, maybe that's where we have to go, because there's such entrenched moneyed interests in maintaining the 1636 Harvard model. They call it isomorphism. Everybody wants to be Harvard. Even like your little community college right outside your door, everybody wants to be. If we're all trying to be an institution that was found in slave owning and, you know, domination of and killing of Native folks, that's no mimicking that I want to be part of. So I don't have the answers, but we got to start thinking about creating a new world.
That's really good. I think one of the things, the whole money piece of it, it was really interesting for all of us a couple of summers ago when I saw my brother George screaming for his mother on the streets of Minneapolis, that the same group that expelled Colin Kaepernick for using his rights protected under the law and the Constitution, right? Then was saying Black Lives Matter. That wasn't about the Black lives. That was about the white advertisers, right? That's what that was about. Do you really think Nike is on the side of the people because it isn't profitable? Every time they put up a cap piece, stuff is being sold. Every time they put up a rainbow piece, it's being sold. It doesn't matter how, I mean, I live in the Southeast. I lived in Alabama and Tennessee. Those are all 3 Nike schools. And anytime they release a new Nike sneaker, all of the road tiders in the world, I don't wear Nike, I'm not doing, please. There's 10 to 1. Do you think Nike doesn't understand that it's profitable to be in the diversity business? But let's not go too far. let's not go too far into it. I don't want to forget one of the things I threw in the chat. So if y'all can grab the chat, because Timothy was talking about the impact of racism on bodies. One of my former students, Dr. Leanne Woods Burnham, is one of the leading researchers and now a professor, and her research is all centered, since she was an undergrad researching at Cleveland State, has centered around prostate cancer. And we all know her dad was diagnosed with prostate cancer as a non-trad. That's why she went back to college, was to dedicate herself into researching this disease that Black men die of. And what the data says is white men die of other stuff because they get diagnosed so late in life that other things end up killing them. And she wanted to get the data to find out why. So I threw some links in there, but Leanne can do a better job of articulating this, obviously, because she's a doc. But what she's found in all of her research and all of the blood samples, and it doesn't matter economics, it doesn't matter what region, Black men just have this inordinate amount of cortisol levels in our blood. And why do we have increased cortisols? Because cortisol is a stress hormone. Why do we have stress? Because of racism and white supremacy. So when people say it is a health crisis, it is a health crisis. I put Leanne's LinkedIn in there. Y'all can hook her up, just say, hey, you're Adam's student. I have some questions. You want to come talk? She's my student, she will do that. But she is the cred of the work that I'm talking about, because she will tell you in millions of samples, and now her work at City of Hope that is 100% dedicated to eradicating health disparities. And that all starts with the isms. I don't want to forget though, Timothy, Heather, because y'all do a lot of work in K-12 spaces. Timothy, you and I met when you were the dean of urban education in Minnesota. One of the things I want to really understand is because we have this parallel track. So we have this performative DE&I thing that we all need to have, and then we have this other group who's labeling anything that's around teaching history, let's just say real history, as CRT, which has nothing to do with history, and they're basically proving CRT every time they do it. But this juxtaposition, and we have a lot of our K-12 educators, administrators, parents on the call who are frustrated. Their school boards have been infiltrated with, to be honest, maniacs that are passing rules and legislation that are controlling classrooms, that are making classrooms unsafe, not just for educators, but also for the children. I mean, we're talking about college campuses, that's grown folks. But what do we say, Timothy, to the educator who is in the work, who was teaching, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, and now all of a sudden, you can't teach it. Can't even talk about Fred Hampton. Can't even talk about revolution. You can't even talk about Thanksgiving being a massacre rather than some celebration everybody brought stuff to. I mean, if I'm an educator, that's a pretty lonely gig, and they are walking out of classrooms in droves, no matter what their race or ethnicity is, because people don't become public school teachers for the money. They want to educate the babies. And now you have maniacs who are on school boards, many of them not even from those communities, who are there dictating what those teachers can do in the classroom. At the same time, those teachers are in real physical harm because we still have a pandemic going on. Can you talk about that, you and right after that, Heather, because I know you do a lot of healing work in those spaces.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first and foremost, my approach has been directly to hold space for educators and students alike. I was just at a school just a few weeks ago, and I was in a beautiful classroom full of so many beautiful young Black and brown, high schoolers and their Black female educator, and we just held space, man. We sat in a circle. I held space to do some somatic things, and we talked about this issue. We talked about the denial and erasure of being able to even learn about the systems that end up with the outcomes that we have. And so one of the things that I have often said, and I said to them, understand, white supremacy is not an act, it's an outcome. The act is all the other stuff we've been talking about. Settler, colonial, anti-Black racism. And so we sat with that, and I said, this is another iteration of it, right? And then we began to think about, as we were doing some somatic things and thinking, so what are the things that we really have to consider when people present these arguments that are not founded in any truth? And so part of it is educating, even young students on some of this, and getting them around the language necessary, so when they have to be able to be resilient enough to speak back and speak truth to power, they can do that because they're self-actualized in a way in their nervous systems in order to be able to speak clearly. And this is what I said. I taught them about Linda Taylor. Look up Linda Taylor. Look up Linda Taylor, the Black woman who was used as the poster figure for what Ronald Reagan called the welfare queen. And I told them, look up Willie Horton. All this new this is not new in terms of the tactics, the different iteration of CRT, anti-CRT, it's Willie Horton. It's Linda Taylor all over again. In fact, I said, go look up the film Birth of a Nation. It is Birth of a Nation all over again, to render Black and brown thinkers and scholars and contributors to our society as raping, pillaging maniacs that you have to distrust and fear. So we need to wipe them and stamp them out. But that takes a nervous system that's capable of healing first and holding space and knowing that there are people who are willing to come together with them, which is what I wanted to share. And I can tell you what, man, they still contact me. We're going back and forth because they need that resource. They need somebody who's willing to hold space, even if it's in a virtual environment every now and again, so that they can feel empowered enough to be able to speak the truth. And that group is actually speaking truth against right now the powers that be in our state of Minnesota. They have organized, right? And that's the thing. So I just say it like that. But if I can back up just one quick second, I'm on the whole thing about what you mentioned about the justice. Beautiful. So Dr. Ritter, I love, and I love how you were framing your comments. But real quickly, I have to get this out. I call it venture capitalist justice work. And here's how it works, right? It is, I put it like this: if they can't assimilate you, they will curate you. And then if they can't totally curate, then they'll start having a campaign to hate you, to kick you out, to keep you out. So like this whole diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work, the way that it's being performed right now, it'll have us believing that Black folk dressed in prison garb doing crip walks at the Super Bowl and then a white dude kneeling as if that's something. That's what it'll have us believing. Venture capitalist justice work. That's what it'll have.
Y'all need to, and while you all are Googling everybody else, Google Timothy Berry. The brother got a Grammy, just so you know. Is a bad boy, okay? So I just appreciate y'all sharing, being vulnerable. These aren't easy conversations, right? I mean, we all got full-time jobs, right? And so it's an honor for, obviously shout out to InfoBase for creating space to keep it real. They know I'm gonna keep it real. They know Heather's gonna keep it real. They know the people that I'm gonna bring are gonna be 100 on it. So that's because they're a business, they're a corporation. But see, the reality is these conversations need to be had because it feels like your voice is in the wilderness, right? The one thing, and then Heather, I'm gonna come back to you on the healing piece and the work you do in K-12 spaces with children and with teachers, because this isn't just about Black and brown educators and Black and brown kids. There's a lot, there is a lot of middle-class white teachers who are fighting the fight, trying to not just teach Black and brown kids about history, but trying to teach history, like history. None of this is like rather than the mythology we've passed off on like a history like that George Washington had wooden teeth and all of this foolishness, right? So quick story. Oprah Winfrey is on one of her shows talking to Maya Angelou. And they're having this conversation, and Maya is a mentor for Oprah, right? So these are some lionesses, just saying. And Oprah is talking to Maya, and they're talking like we ain't watching, like it isn't even on TV. I'm like, I'm watching this. And Oprah says to Maya, you know, you remember that time when you had that dinner party and everybody was at your house and we were at the dinner party? Now, everybody, just for a second, imagine who is at a dinner party at Maya Angelou's house with Oprah Winfrey. Okay? Who you think was up in there? Okay? Like some hitters, world changers. I mean, whether it's political or business or thought leaders or all of the things, educators. Okay? And Oprah said, you know, there was that guy in that person, we'll say. That person was that dinner party person that goes to one group of people and they were telling an off-color joke, just a joke that wasn't appropriate. But nobody said anything. And they moved from group to group and everybody's like, and at some point they kind of got it to move on. And Oprah said, you know, after about the third group, I heard you bellow across the room, excuse me, get your coat. And Oprah said, we all just stopped. And she said, why did you do that? And Maya said, I just wasn't going to allow that in my space. I wasn't going to allow, Taryn talks about her peace, protecting. Maya said, I don't need that in my walls. I don't need that in the air. I don't need that around. I don't know what the joke was, but it just wasn't something that was constructive or positive or healing. And then Oprah said, the thing that was interesting is that all the rest of us have millions of dollars and we're doing this and we're doing that, but nobody said anything and you did. And Maya said, baby, I don't expect you to have those muscles yet. You make those choices one no at a time. Taryn talks about saying no, one no at a time. Because then when the big no happens, you got it. It's the reason why we know. You can try to take voting rights away from Black and brown people, but that is in our DNA, stuff that you don't want to wake up in us. I've stood on the crest of the Edmund Pettus Bridge and imagined folks coming at me. Ain't nowhere to go. You might want to know some history because you're messing with the wrong folks. That's the reality of who we are, right? But we know with some of our colleagues, I talked to, Ursuline, 500 educators a couple of weeks ago, and I probably met with 30 different groups of them. They didn't know each other. 30 different groups of white educators in K-12 schools. I said, well, y'all live in the same city, the same state. Y'all don't, do you know? Well, no, Adam. Well, let me introduce y'all to each other so you can link arms. So we need to show you how to organize, how to mobilize, and how to start saying no one choice at a time. But we know you ain't got those muscles yet. That's in our DNA to fight the power. That's who we are. And we wouldn't be here if we didn't we're risking death. Every day when I go walk in my neighborhood or go to sleep in my own house, God help us, a no-knock warrant don't show up. So we have a different DNA, but you can do it too. It's just one choice. Like Maya said, Oprah isn't Maya Angelou. I don't know who else was in the space, but none of them were strong enough to say it and to protect their peace like my sister Taryn talks about. Heather, talk about the healing work you do with kids in schools around the impact of some of this anti-Blackness, anti-queer, because we also have this thing, and I don't want to miss it. We have craziness happening in Texas and other states right now, where God help you, don't be how God made you. I have a theology degree, so anybody want to start talking about how God made people, we can have that conversation, okay? But you have that too around our students whose parts may be different from who God made them to be. That's attacking, and that's happening in our schools right now in Texas. Talk a little bit about that work and what kind of advice you give to educators and administrators and parents who love our K-12 students on how to let them heal and have space. Can you do that?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that we've talked about today that will connect to this, right? I think that some of this is around flexing those muscles, right? As someone who's an artist, who's an educator, who, who has been an administrator, high level administrator for years and left education recently, but still works very closely with, K through 12 and post-secondary education. A lot of this is very close to my heart. I am deliberate and afraid of nothing tattooed across my shoulders so that whenever I leave a meeting, whether it's out of protest or, even if it is a mutual agreed upon ending of a meeting, I know that I've left what I needed to on the table. And that is something that is, part of my integrity, right? Knowing that, as Audre Lorde said, we are here, right? We are here to be in solidarity, and that we're doing this work with the chosen understanding that I have power, right? Like, I am a child of immigrants, right? I am not someone who has identified as a scholar and has not been someone who has navigated the academy easily and still continues to struggle with that. I think as we continue to navigate anti-critical race theory legislation, chilling legislation, anti-trans, anti-queer, fill in the blank, policy and mandates. There's a lot of different ways that educators can navigate, right? And I think part of this is, of course, we want folks who can be in spaces and advocate with and for students. Some of this is coalition building, right? And being able to work with local, I'd say, as someone who's in nonprofit organizations, local school boards. We want to be able to work with lobbyists and actually be thinking about not just within our systems, but outside, right? I don't believe that our systems were made to protect us and our youth, right? They are systems to indoctrinate us into very singular ways of thinking, right? In order to go to the post-secondary educational institutions that very much mimic what the Harvards, the Yales, the even, community colleges, our state systems, we know that they very much mimic very rigid white supremacist ways of knowing, right? We know that in our bodies. We know that we weren't meant to survive in those spaces. I think there's other ways to also honor and be able to navigate, right, and use oppositional consciousness. So maybe we don't call, the work that we do specifically critical race theory or, gender expansive learning and teaching, but we can honor the ways that students and youth want to name themselves. We can have activities and practices where people can tell their own stories or ask in trauma-informed ways, how do you want to name yourself in this space? Or how do we have practices that safely allow people to name themselves, right? And know that, okay, do you call yourself this here? And what names and pronouns are you using at home, right? How do we actually build enclaves of safer spaces for, youth and sometimes some of their other loved ones who want to make sure that we're able to really allow folks to show up in the ways that make sense. Some ways that I've worked with educators who are trying to navigate this like anti-fill in the blank, identities, pedagogies, is really creating just very creative activities. So whether that is, we are talking about another version of a story that I've heard or understand is, what are different ways that music and art during this time may have shown up? From a different perspective, how might someone tell that event? Why? How do you think this classroom and the way that we interact came to be? In my own family, would we engage in this way? How might we understand the enrollment policy and the admissions policy to be this way? Why would it have only been one person at a time versus bringing another family member? Because it doesn't really make sense for a youth, especially a youth of color who's just coming of age, to only bring one person. In other communities, we would bring multiple family members, right? So really finding creative ways and not just doing that alone, right? We're moving from an individualist culture to a collective way of thinking, right? Which in itself challenges white supremacist, settler, colonial, anti-Black, cis, heteropatriarchal ways of thinking, right? I think something that we have missed is really like, I think, Timothy, you've talked a lot about this, but this quote, I think, is a really great way to kind of like wrap up a lot of this conversation. And this is by a healer and a good friend of mine, Susan Raffo. Healing is dangerous work. Healing is about going into the struggle. When trauma happens, we go away from that space in our body where it happened. And when we go into it, it hurts so much as it wakes back up. I'm interested in creating the place where the body can remember itself, even though it hurts to do it. Where feeling better is part of it, but that's not the goal. Struggling better is the goal. I think when I experience that, and I think about diversity, equity, inclusion work, justice work, when I think about, what my role as an educator and someone who's tried to center healing and cultural strategy and art in my work, it hasn't necessarily been, how do we make this space like more quote unquote a better climate for someone, right? But I think a lot about where do we need to have these points of healing together, of connection, of heart, right? And how do we make that better together, right? And how do I recognize what is the struggle, right? And how do we struggle better, right? Because I think when I think about trauma-informed work, I've moved from DEI, I think, right, to a struggle better trauma-informed approach, because I've recognized, since these systems were not made with and for us, right, how do we navigate and or recreate our realities into radical futures? Because these systems are not going to change, and creating these band-aid solutions are not going to work for me, right? And until we completely crumble them to the ground and either recreate something or not, my concern is, are we just replicating harm? Is that going to help us transform our DNA again and think about like intergenerational harm and pain and trauma and allow us to move toward intergenerational healing? I'm not quite sure. Are we just telling ourselves these are intergenerational coping mechanisms, which could be really great forms of capital? That's one thing, right? But I want to know, what are the ways that we could struggle better or struggle less, right? And heal, right, in community. That's what I care about.
When I think, Heather, thank you so much. I think there's some, well, it's a little heavy, right? Yeah. I mean, there's some stuff with this that I keep thinking back to the Oprah and Maya, right? There's a couple questions in the chat. What do I do? You fight, right? That's how you know. It's, like I said, I have a theology degree. Think about the hateful, harmful, hurtful, sinful things you think in church. Devil be working his in church, right? I mean, that's crazy. I mean, some still come through my brain in a church. Now, Martin Luther has a quote that says, I can't be faulted for the birds that fly through my head, only those get caught in my hair, right? So those thoughts are just thoughts, right? It's part of being human. That's why I love me some Luther. Not Martin Luther King, Martin Luther, right? But understanding that we must be onto something, because the devil's working his tail off in this country. There's a whole group of people that are distracted by what they might get, what might happen, right? Some of this is about coalition building, as Heather said, right? All of the educators on it, what do I do? What do I do? You fight, you teach, right? You are called to teach. You have a calling on your life. It's like your Hippocratic oath to do no harm. I don't give a crap what the school board says. Unite, join arms, with other educators that are, because we outnumber them. That's the reality. That's the reason why this is happening. Or this does become apartheid South Africa. Because it's like 10 to 1. And by the time my grandbabies have kids, it'll be 25 to 1. And I'm not talking about Black and brown folks. I'm talking about the people. Zach, you are the people, bro, right? My Jewish brother. See, the people outnumber all of the foolishness. And all they want to do is keep power. Y'all have seen the caricature of the man who looks like Montgomery Burns, and there's a guy over here who has 3 cookies, and there's this other guy over here, and he says, he might come get your cookies, while Montgomery Burns got a whole case of cookies behind him, right? That's the game that's being run, to get people to see the other as their threat, when it's really somebody else got their hand in their pocket. The key with this, and I want to pivot back to Taryn, and we'll maybe 2-3 more minutes, but I want, because Taryn really does a great job of protecting her peace, but she is a justice warrior lioness. So for all of us who this work is our calling on our life, we can't fight for others and not take care and not protect our peace. Taryn, what advice do you have, and what are your strategies, knowing that you have a life dedicated to a struggle for the least of these, for others, for all of these things, but at the same time, you can't do that unless you put the mask on yourself first? How do you take care of yourself and your peace, and what advice do you have for all of us who are trying to put some of our thoughts in action and to be here to fight another day for others?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of, some folks may be familiar with them, the NAP ministry and their work on rest, and not even just a lot of us, we look at rest through a lens of, oh, I need to rest so that I can be more productive. No, that's capitalism tainting that idea for you. You don't have to rest so that you can go back to work and make someone else more money. You don't have to rest so that you can check all these other things off your to-do list. You get to rest because that is your divine birthright. Because sometimes it's nice to just lay down and not do anything, and not even trying to view resting as being productive as doing something. No, you can rest and not do anything, and that's okay. Now, I say that, and I also want to fully acknowledge that is, I think, even arriving and being comfortable in that mindset, that is a lifetime of work. Because I have also been raised up in this culture, in this society that tells me my value is directly tied to my salary. And how many of us, especially for the educators who are on this call, how many of us work in places where it may not be written down, but there's the expectation that you are available evenings, weekends, on vacation. No, I'm resting. Don't call me. And so with that, and with some of that idea of protecting your peace, that alone, like, that's doing the work too. Because these are systems, as other folks have really eloquently shared and stated already, these are systems that were not designed for us, for anyone who's different. And so just existing in them is in and of itself an act of resistance. And sometimes that's good enough. And I think also, especially for people who are really passionate about this work, because it's something that we care about, it's really, really natural to feel like we want to learn everything about it, to feel like we need to stay up to date with the latest information, all the news on it, watch all the videos that come across our social media feeds, and seek those kinds of things out. And we don't have to do that. We don't have to continuously sit with the trauma and re-traumatize ourselves. We can turn off the news and that's okay. You know, we can log off and that's okay. And so creating space as best as we can. In some areas of our lives, it's going to be easier than others. And some positions are going to be, like some work positions, are going to be able to do it more easily than others. But as best as we can, carving out the time to say, this is for me, and allowing yourself to hold space. Dr. Barry and Heather spoke a lot about holding space. Doing that is so powerful. Feel what you need to feel. If you need to sit in a corner and cry because this work is hard and depressing, and oh my gosh, when you think about it, it can be really overwhelming, okay, do that. Tears are healing. We have to be okay with some of those uncomfortable feelings, because otherwise our bodies keep that, and that's going to add to the trauma, and that's going to build up, and that's going to be harmful for us. And we're not going to make it if we keep holding on to that. We have to release that.
So brilliant. Sometimes our rest is the best way to fight, right? Sometimes not buying into the old adage, well, we're Black, we got to work 3 times as hard to get just bullshit. I ain't doing it. Okay?
No.
Nope, nope, nope. Okay? I'm going to show up. I'm going to do my work. I'm going to do my work authentically. Karen works on campus with me. I promise you, authentic me is what you're going to get. And if that doesn't work, that's okay. I think we're realizing that our bodies are important. It can all be taken away. The myth of the stuff that we need to have, some of us as Black and brown folks feeling like if I have these letters after my name, or I have this in the driveway, or this house, or this job, that somehow I'm better than. There was a huge part of my career that it was like trying to get satiated off eating cotton candy. I need more money, I need more title, I need more this. And all of it is because I was broken. In the end, my students looked in my face and said, we don't give a crap if you have a PhD and EDD, we care that you love me. And they weren't enough. All of the work I do, my kids, my grandbabies, my wife, they weren't enough. Because it was all coming from this place of trauma that I needed to fill up on stuff that is just designed to make me want more stuff. This kind of community is the thing that not only supports, but it sustains through the work. Again, the hate mongers, have always been united. We are just keeping our heads down trying to get after it. I met Ursuline on a talk. We've never even met in person. Zach and I have never met in person. These are my people. Build those communities and bridges. Love on each other. Be vulnerable. The best part of my work, being a 51-year-old grandfather now, is just connecting like-minded people. And say, Zach, do you know Taryn? Because she's the homie. Y'all need to know each other because y'all don't know, but y'all are family. To make those connections here today with 150, 60, 70 people at the high note, that's the important part. So y'all know that my contact info is in the chat. Don't hesitate. Our panelists, please throw your contact info in the chat. If you can't get them, you can get them through me. My Twitter and stuff is Hey Coach Adam. It's weird, it's easy. But we will do this again in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, we're going to talk about college campuses. And we are seeing a total transformation of who students are and how to serve them. I call them post-war students. We all know that after World War II, no one expected for things to go back to the way it was before. We have students right now across the country. Zach and I, Timothy, all of us, we've been doing this higher ed work a long time. I ain't never seen students like this. Like what they need and how they need to be served. It isn't that they're snowflake or they're this or they're that, they're just different. And so we have a unique opportunity in my work, is that right now, this is the smallest number of post-war students we're gonna have, But in 4 years, our entire campus is going to have those students, and we better shift. Because if we don't, we won't be able to serve them. So next, in a couple of weeks, I think it's the 23rd or the 24th, Heather, right? We're going to be talking about building student-ready campuses. This idea of students being college-ready is bullcrap, okay? We are a flagship land grant that I work at. We are about serving the people, whether they take classes or not. So we have to be student-ready, and what student-ready looks like now in 2022, 3, 4, 5, because students are not going back to pre-war. They are post-war students now. There's Loon. Loon always shows up. So that is our next webinar we'll be doing in a couple weeks. Again, thank you so much to InfoBase for creating the space, for making space. Y'all just know that we love you, we support you. Thank you to our panelists for sharing your hearts, your passions. We will continue to be in contact. Y'all connect to each other and take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Appreciate y'all.
Thanks, y'all. And there will be a blog coming your way on Tuesday. So look for that follow-up email.
And thank you to Loon. Good to see you, Loon.
Oh, Loon Dog. Thanks, y'all.